Hello, and thank you for joining us today for the virtual office hours and a short presentation on storage practices. This monthly series is a program of the Vermont Historical Records Program, part of the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration. VHRP is generously funded by the National Historical Publications and Records Commission and the Vermont Secretary of State's Office. My name is Jane Cadwallader, and as the roving archivist, I provide technical assistance and guidance to historical societies, public libraries with special collections, and municipalities in support of the VHRP mission to improve public access to and engagement with historical records and to encourage and facilitate collaborative efforts among Vermont's historical records repositories. With this month's topic, storage practices, we will discuss good enough or better methods for storing archival materials. This presentation will focus on adapting, relocating, and simple changes that can limit risk and help preserve collections. Although this presentation is focused on archival materials, many of the ideas can be applied to museum objects as well. Before we get started, I wanted to talk about dedicated storage, which is a part of the message for this presentation. This is space that can be a shelf, closet, or room that is reserved for storing collection materials based on the reasoning that collections demand specialized storage apart from equipment, office supplies, and other non-accessioned items. How many of you have this type of space for your collections or are thinking about creating a dedicated space? Archival storage is not a one-size-fits-all. It is based on your available space and needs. However, there are some key roles that storage play in the preservation of your collections. So what are our ideas of ideal collection storage? I tend to dream about endless space and state-of-the-art technology, like Utah State Archives' robotic arm that assists in pulling records, as pictured in this slide. But the purpose of this presentation is to focus on what we really have and how we can work on creating dedicated space and improving conditions. So what do we want for collection storage? First and foremost, we want a place to hold our stuff, right? But archival storage is not only a place to put collection materials away. It is a preservation tool. It is a way that we can protect these materials that we are responsible for. If you have a dedicated storage space, this is where these materials will be kept for the majority of their time. So thinking of ways to improve this storage will have a large impact on their care. This list on the slide from the Historical Society of Pennsylvania lays out some best practices when planning archival storage. Why are we so concerned with temperature and humidity? Why would we want to prevent a mold bloom or insect infestation? Why do I need to keep the storage dark? It's because it is easier to apply preventative measures to a probable issue than to react to that problem. Preventing a mold outbreak is far less harmful to people responding and less expensive than treating affected records. Limiting light exposure to photographs can dramatically slow permanent fading. This list may be overwhelming, and not everything is attainable in your organization. However, we shouldn't look at this list as something that needs to be done immediately, with resources that are not available. We should think about how we can make small improvements and adaptations with the sources we have. Let's make things better, not best. Now let's discuss some simple interventions and actions taken in the storage space that can make an impact on the environment, security, and overall risks. So what are the priorities when we're trying to store our collections? And how can we make changes to the storage to prevent any risks or minimize risks? From the previous list, we have determined that there are some key priorities for collection storage: environment, security, furniture and housing, and emergency preparedness. Here we have a list of those items and some of the topics that can lead to issues in your storage. With environment, temperature, and relative humidity, these do need to be monitored and improved to prevent chemical reactions that damage materials. Limiting light sources can also prevent damage, and implementing a pest management system can make an environment unwelcoming to pests that can damage and distort collections. For security, storage access, controlling the access to minimize human interferences with your collections. And furniture and housing, using materials that will not accelerate deterioration, using materials that are inert. You also need to consider orientation and location that maximizes the existing resources. And emergency preparedness, identifying risks, including events that could harm your collections, planning and implementing actions to limit these risks, and more planning and training, adding trainings and practicing scenarios, and also improving your plans after an event and the response. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on some of the ways that we can take these risks and help to minimize them, starting with the environment. It's very important to monitor temperature and relative humidity within your storage spaces. Um, if you have a relative humidity that's above 50%, let's say 60 or 70%, for a sustained period of time, that can lead to a mold bloom, which can be very damaging to your collections and also unsafe for your health. So the first thing to do is start monitoring that with different tools. One that we always recommend is a data logger. This is a measuring tool that takes continuous measurements over time so that you can get an idea of how your storage environment is maintaining temperature and relative humidity over a long period of time, including up to a year. These can be a little more expensive, but they will provide data that you can have analyzed. There are also options with manual measurement tools, and with these you can purchase them at your local hardware store, off the internet, and these can measure both temperature and humidity. Um, and with this style, we do recommend keeping a log of temperatures. So if you come into your space every day, trying to capture a log of the temperature at different times of day. And this can also vary on when the space is accessed. So if you only go in once a week, you could take that log as well. There are several ways that you can improve temperature and humidity in your spaces. One is considering an alternate location. Oftentimes, we tend to store items in traditional storage spaces, attics, basements, but these are often not environmentally controlled. Basements can be damp and humid. Attics can get very hot or very cold based on the season. So thinking about moving your collections to a space that's comfortable to you. So maybe in a closet or a room on the ground level of your location, something with a door that can be closed. Um, Another way to deal with humidity is desiccants. Desiccants can be purchased again online or at your hardware store. And these are materials that are hygroscopic. They absorb water and can help to control humidity in your space. They do need to be checked often because they can hit a limit of absorption. Some desiccants can be placed in the oven, dried out, and then put back in place. Dehumidifiers are also an option, um, and these can be placed within a storage space. Some things to consider: a dehumidifier will be removing water out of your space, and you are left with a large container of water. This needs to be emptied on a regular basis, or a pipe to a drain is recommended. Um, these two items, although they do help to dehumidify the air, are not permanent solutions, but they can help if you are raising money for a new system, or looking for an alternate location. Another thing to consider is housing. So, housing are the enclosures, folders, and boxes that you place your collections in. With archival housing, these materials are acid free, and they work together as layers of protection for your collections. So each layer adds a little bit more protection and can create an environment around your materials that is slightly improved upon the exterior situation. Now, another way to help prevent chemical deterioration in your collections is limiting light exposure. Both natural and artificial light can have deleterious effects on materials, um, and things like ceramics are not affected, metal not affected in the same way. But what we're talking about are things like photographs. The processes and the materials used to create photographs, when exposed to light, can fade over time. And this is a permanent damage. It cannot be um, uh, uh, fixed. So you do want to focus on keeping those items um, away from light fixtures or windows. For photographs and documents, we recommend that you don't place those on permanent display within your spaces, but that you alternate their display with other items, or create high quality facsimiles and display the facsimiles. If a copy of a photo fades over time, um, you can just create a new copy. Whereas if the original photo fades over time, you can't repair that damage. So, ways to limit light exposure: window covers and UV blocking films can help. Um, LED lights, which are very common in our household stores and hardware stores, these do not produce UV light, and they also produce a minimum amount of heat, which can also have a damaging effect. Also consider implementing closing procedures where you make sure all of the curtains are closed within your exhibit areas. If you have a dedicated storage space, that the lights are off, and if there are windows, that they are covered when you leave the space. If you have items in glass cabinets, you can also cover those materials. Um, with pest management, a lot of this has to do with determining risky behaviors and setting out a plan um, to respond to them. One of them, and this one is actually very effective, is food and drink policies. If you have a dedicated storage space, um, it is recommended that you don't allow food or drink in that space. First off, there's a risk of spills, which could damage the materials, but also remnants of food, sugars in our drinks, and things like that can also attract pests. So, limiting those food and drink in those spaces can help to deter pests. A regular cleaning schedule. Pests need a warm environment, that has food, which unfortunately sometimes our collection materials, which are organic materials, look like food to them. And they need a little bit of calm. So a regular cleaning schedule helps to interrupt that calm that they have. Sweeping on a weekly or a monthly basis, vacuuming, dusting the shelves. These are all things that are relatively low cost and can help to disrupt those nice cozy homes that these pests are looking for. Air ventilation is another important part. One of the pests that is very risky to our collections is mold and mold spores. Mold spores are everywhere. They are ubiquitous in our lives. And so, one of the ways that we can help to prevent them settling and creating a colony is air ventilation, along with the regular cleaning schedule. This moves the spores and doesn't let them settle easily, where if the humidity went up, the temperature went up, they could create a mold bloom. Also, monitoring for pests. So, using insecticides and pesticides can be very damaging, um, also to our health, but we don't really want them around our collections either. So, identifying a pest issue before it becomes an infestation is one way to help prevent this risk to our collections. And one way to do that is with blunder traps. This is a small adhesive tent that is used. This is not a mouse trap. This is smaller and it targets insects. So these would be placed by areas of ingress and egress, by windows, or places within the collection where there's some form of outward movement. So if you do find pests on the trap, you can use one of the useful pest ID websites to identify if this is a type of pest that is a risk to your collections. Not every insect is a risk to damaging our collections, but they can be a sign of an issue. For example, flies can be an example of moisture or humidity. Security is another issue that could lead to loss of collections or damage to collections. It's not very common, but there are a few things you can do to help prevent any issues. One is to keep your storage area locked. Leave a sign that says that this is a staff only or volunteer only space. You can also create an access log for these materials. We also recommend that with the keys that they are limited to a certain number of people, that those people are documented. So in case they leave the organization, the key can be returned. Another preventative measure, actually, inventories work for all kinds of things. They're amazing. Basically, what they do is you inventory your collection, you identify everything that's in there, the location that it's at, and this can help if there is an issue in the future. You can identify items that are missing during the inventory process. You can also identify significant items that may need additional security, perhaps a locked cabinet or box, um, like the next point, boxing items. So this is a way to hide items in plain sight. Oftentimes, theft is not an issue, but it could just be somebody finds an interesting item and wants to hold it, and that could be damaging to it. So boxing the item can add a layer of protection between uh, the material and uh, the individual. And it's so important. I put it twice. Knowing what you have, an inventory. Really, I can't impress that enough. Having that intellectual control of your collection, knowing what's there, where it's located, is very important to the security of your materials. All right, furniture and housing. Now, most of you may already have existing storage furniture, an existing space. So this is really to talk about not what the ideal furniture is, but how you can adapt your existing furniture to be a better space for your collections. In the archival and museum field, the ideal storage is the powder coated steel. This is an inert surface covering that won't react with the items that are set on top of it. These are sturdy metal cabinets and shelves, and you can find them in collection spaces all over the world. But oftentimes, that's not what we have. We may have wooden cabinets, wooden shelves. This is not a message that you need to immediately replace them with powder coated steel. There are other ways that you can address the wood without having to replace it. And one of those is creating a barrier layer. You can line the shelves with a piece of thick acid free paper or polyester film. These will create that barrier if you have unboxed items. Um, you can also consider housing, which I'll talk about in a minute for that. Location within the space. So when you have furniture and housing, are at least for myself, the first thing I think about is moving everything up against the wall. But you really need to determine what's on the other side of that wall. Are they exterior walls? Are there doors or windows on those walls? Those are all things that should be considered. If it's an exterior wall, due to the change in weather and temperature throughout the year, that can actually have an effect on things stored nearby. So perhaps moving your shelves a few inches away from the wall so that there's an air pocket between. So the back of your boxes, your books, or things are not in that area where two different environments are reacting with each other, the interior and the exterior. Also, making sure that everything's at least 3 inches above the ground. Now, you may be thinking, my collection is kept on a ground level. There's no river or other body of water around here. I'm not really at risk for a flood. But there are other water events that can affect your collections. Think of a sprinkler system that breaks, a water leak, a hot water heater. All of these types of things, they can create a water event on that floor that may not be affected by flooding. So moving everything about 3 inches or 4 inches off the ground will give that little bit of leeway so that those boxes are not impacted by the water. So before we were talking about barrier layers, housing should be considered as another barrier to those shelves. If you can't replace your shelves, but you can get some archival boxes, that's great. Acid-free enclosures are also a way to do that. Now, once you have things in the box, orientation is very important. There are certain materials that do better if they are oriented vertically within the box as opposed to laying flat. For example, photographs. glass plate negatives. These are all examples of things that should be oriented vertically to help protect them. For glass plate negatives, um, if they are stacked horizontally, the weight from the glass can actually create pressure on the bottom layers and crack those lower glass plate negatives. And don't overstuff or understuff your containers. These boxes work as a structure. So if you have folders in your box and it's so full that you are having difficulty moving folders in and out, that can cause damage to your records. It can also undermine the structure of the box over time. And it's also a safety issue. An overstuffed box can be very heavy and difficult to move. If it's understuffed, it's also an issue for structure for those materials inside. They can lean over, they can start to develop a distortion. So, adding some kind of spacer in there, if you can't fill the box, is the best thing to do. And again, another safety issue for the people caring for your collections: store heavy containers lower than the lighter ones. Again, we just talked about overstuffed ones being a safety issue for being very heavy and hard to move. But imagine if that heavy box was on the top shelf. That could be a risk for the person that's trying to get it down. So try to orient those on the lower shelves.